inexplicably, he yelled, "Damn!" and he slammed the paper on the coffee table. And I was quite disturbed, quite surprised. And he left. He just went back off into his study. And I went up and I looked at the paper to see what was going on, if I could get any clue. And there was this picture of the smiling man who was standing in front of a crowd, and he had his hands up in the air. Victory! I learned a lot about Nixon over the next 6 years or so. 1969. Many of us reacted in a similar way to the most recent election, and I have talked with many who have been living in a cloud of grief and even despair in the last few days, and we've heard echoes of that in our service so far. Rabindranath Tagore, that great Bengali mystic philosopher of the 20th century, said, "I slept and I dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and I saw that life was service. So I acted, and behold, service was joy." I would add to that, of course, that service is not a simple joy. It can also be hard. It can also be complicated. It can be difficult. I'm wearing this tie. This tie was given to me because it's a nice hand-painted tie, because I was engaged in a lot of marchers, especially during the early parts of Black Lives Matter. We were talking about people who were being needlessly killed and brutalized in this country. And someone gave it, and he goes, "I noticed that you like to take quiet walks with people in the morning." And it's all images of people standing in a kind of foggy. Taking a walk seems like a nice thing to do. Sometimes demanding dignity and peace takes work. The Hebrew word avoda means work, and it means worship, and it means service. This word first appears in the Hebrew scriptures in Genesis, where God creates the first human being in the Garden of Eden to work it, to take care of it and serve it. The English root of the word serve is the Latin word for servants or slave, invoking the difficulties of service. But no matter how difficult or joyful or easy, no matter what you serve and what you live for, ultimately what you live for, what you serve in your life, in your days, in your actions, in your words, in just the quality of your being, you are determining the meaning of your life. What you serve usually endures beyond you. If all that you serve and all you work for is stuff that's just going to vanish into the ether, then maybe you should adjust your living. Find the things that make your life meaningful. Do what matters. Build love and goodness in the world. One of our stated values as Unitarian Universalists is to serve pluralism. Article 2 of our national bylaws now defines what that means, pluralism, to serve it. It says we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. To learn. And we embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. I loved Sarah's little story about human beings meeting each other with love and some curiosity and at least some respect. I met that guy. It's good to serve food to hungry people who might not have enough. It's good to treat human beings well. My father was always involved in pluralism and justice in many ways. He was a political science professor, and he was an active politician. He served 2 terms as mayor of our city a very progressive man in a fairly conservative town. And he was involved in many other civic, political groups. Decades after that one morning, when I saw him angry, and he was dying of cancer, and I was working in Fort Collins, but my family was living in Denver, so I was driving up and down the Front Range. I would stop and see him every week, and we talked. And one time he said to me, "I'm really glad that you are going into religion." He said, "I know for certain how to make democracy work well. But I have learned that democracy is only as good as its people. And I don't know how to make people good." I said, "I hope you'll figure that out," he said. But I've taken that as a charge and never forgotten that charge. As impossible as it may seem, I always serve the good, and more specifically, I serve the people of Unitarian Universalist communities and others who are working to inspire, to nurture lives of value and service to goodness and just peace. Recently, I read a story about a push puller who called a local voter. Push polling is a method of using false information to influence voters. Interestingly, it was Richard Nixon who pioneered the use of push polls back in 1946. He was running for the U.S. House, and paid workers in his campaign would call up registered voters and ask if they knew that Nixon's opponent was a communist, and then ask how that affected their vote. But in this recent story, one that happened this year, I'm told, the voter understands immediately what's going on. Understands immediately this so-called poll is merely designed to slander the candidate they've already decided to vote for. And so the voter goes into a 5-minute rant yelling at the person on the other side, and finally ends, "And if your candidate gets elected, I do not know whether I will leave this country or kill myself." And the poller pauses. It's kind of quiet for a moment and says, "Well, I'll just put you down as undecided then." If you have moved beyond grief and are still undecided about what you're going to do for the next several years, I encourage you to do what we have always done. Serve the good, help people, nurture the seeds of learning and truth and peace and justice in your own self at least. Begin with yourself, and then seek to serve others. I remember when I joined the Women's March in 2017. I was down in Olympia, Washington, and we all felt uplifted that we were doing something to serve women's rights and work for justice and freedom. If you'd told me then that Donald Trump would be elected president for the second time, I would have said, "No way." 4 years ago, I remember saying I was so glad he would never be president again. I still would have said that with confidence about a year ago, and then I read a book called Wrong. In her insightful book, Wrong, subtitled "How Media, Politics, and Identity Drive Our Appetite for Misinformation," Professor Danagal Goldthwaite-Young investigates the emotional and social reasons why people hold to false information, live by it. This book began as an article titled, "I Was a Conspiracy Theorist Too." In it she tells, and it's also in the prologue to this book, she tells about how she reacted when her husband developed a rare form of cancer. At first, her response was to try to find out why he was sick, and then determine who was at fault. And that's where all the conspiracy theories came in. She looked at everything in the neighborhood, all around him, in his life. She started thinking about how she was going to punish the criminals who poisoned her husband and fix the problem. Eventually, she noticed that her husband and her husband's friends were not following that same path. They were not looking to understand and control the situation. Instead, they were affirming what was already good in his life, what was joyful music and sharing that with each other and making it go as long as it could, as big as it could possibly be. While the medical people were fighting the illness, they were fighting despair and claiming sorrow that came from being human and mortal on this earth. And they worked to enhance their connections. And that became a revelation to her. And she combined that revelation with the results of all her sociological studies, and she wrote this book about how our deep need for comprehension, our need for control and community drives us to embrace what she calls wrongness. It's a tendency to cherish things that we're not absolutely certain are true and may even know are not true at some point, but we hold on to it. Dr. Young underscores how the two dominant political parties have become epistemically sorted, which means the way they gain knowledge, the way they understand the world, what they pay attention to, what we are focused on in this world, has become highly polarized and divided until there is this wide gap between the world that one understands and the world that the other understands. And there seems to be no connection between the two of those. She talks about this gulf, and then at the end of her prologue, she upholds a quality that Unitarian Universalists have always upheld when we're talking about ultimate questions, religious questions, things like what is true, and who am I, and what is in charge, and how do I know? She says that we should embrace the possibility that we may never be completely and certainly right. A certain humility. She writes about our need to prioritize humility above confidence and actual or authentic relationships, nurturing actual and authentic relationships over all those socially constructed group memberships. She wants us, and that's why UU congregations are so important to me. That's why I serve them, because here we actually connect with one another. Someone who almost only comes on Zoom, connects all the time, saw me physically in the world and said, "Oh, so good to see you." And there was already a sense of connection, already a sense of being in community. Dr. Young wants us to serve democracy and helping community and disrupt wrongness. And she writes, maybe this book will help us figure out how. And then she adds, of course, I could be wrong. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, as we said. It's a day to honor service in the armed forces. This nation has engaged in many wars. It is part of the lifeblood of this nation, and it is part of the poisoning of the nation that I keep trying to work out in whatever way I can. This nation has engaged in wars against the British and the French and the Spaniards and the Mexicans. We have carried on wars against the original peoples of this land who are still here. We have fought against one another in a massive civil war. We want to say that the service and the struggle was not in vain. Yet we can be ambivalent about war. We want to honor sacrifices and troubles that people face in the service of this nation and its ideals. But we also question the choices and the fight and the divisions and the meaningfulness of those divisions. I want to undermine the idea that fighting and destroying our enemies alone will ever bring peace. President of Israel right now, Netanyahu, seems to think that destroying all his enemies will bring peace. It will not. We know this for a fact. We can see the world. Winning the war, violently killing all the people who wanted to kill him, will not end the war and will not get rid of all the people who want to kill his people. War has its good benefits. We've kind of heard a little bit about just service in general and serving people in difficult times. War opens us to connect other people. I don't think that Americans would know as much about Koreans or Ukrainians or even the Japanese if it hadn't been for war. But it was not just the war. that brought us into contact. I saw this wonderful little documentary at the Wenatchee Valley Museum the other day about Miss Vidal. Miss Vidal's the airplane flew over the Pacific, first airplane to go across the Pacific, and went from Sabushiro Beach in Misawa, Japan, to the grassy hills of East Wenatchee over here. In the movie, there's these interviews, this man speaking in an interview, a man who served this country in two ways. First, in World War II, he was part of the fighting. He flew in airplanes that bombed Japan, and he knew that he had himself helped kill well over 60,000 people in Japan. And he was angry at the Japanese for putting him in that place, for starting the war, for killing other Americans. He was angry about that and hurt by the war, terribly hurt by the war. And of course he was never going to go to Japan ever again after the bombing raids. That was it. And then someone asked him to go to a celebration of that historic flight, where we're going to start a sister city relationship between East Wenatchee and Misawa. He agreed to serve his it took him, I don't know who convinced him, but it took him a little time to serve his community, to serve his community, to serve his friends by going to Japan. And the trip utterly changed his life. It healed the wounds that war had caused in his heart and in his soul and in his mind. He saw people, he felt the generosity of people who had been declared his enemy, who he had declared were still his enemies, giving him food, giving him a place, shelter, welcoming him, thanking him for the connections. I'm always impressed by the people of this community who are always willing to step up and serve in one way or another to heal this world, who work for immigrant justice, who work as tutors, who feed the hungry in various ways, who work in civic organizations at all different levels. I am very proud of the Interfaith Justice Coalition that we helped found, and now includes progressive Mormons, people I didn't even know existed in the world. They will meet here next Sunday, in the afternoon, next Sunday. That coalition. I encourage you to come. I was impressed when we held our after vote gathering online a day or two after the vote came in. About 10% of us were there to support and affirm one another. And at one point someone asked about all the homeless people down by the train who seemed to have just disappeared. They all had left somehow. And she said, what happened to all those people? And there was a member of our congregation who serves on a board, who's made choices about getting those people, figuring out how to get those people into shelters. That's where they went, many of them, to shelters that others created for them. And we serve not necessarily in those big ways. We serve as parents, nurturing lives, teaching, sometimes just being kind and thoughtful in the way we move through the world as a way of serving other people. Looking at people, seeing them, acknowledging and affirming that we are all in this together. Together we will always live by the power of service, to serve community and the vision of the beloved community. That is life. That is what gives us life. Service is life. And this congregation has created a behavioral covenant, a statement of what we want to do and how we want to be in the world. But unlike most UU congregations that has created such a thing, wordy, thoughtful, struggling with words and things, we have actually put our covenant to music. And so I want us all to sing our covenant song. We gather in community. We enter community together.
Well, it's time for the offering. The offering is an ancient element of worship. Giving regardless of amount is a spiritual practice that expresses our concern to others, thankfulness for the abundance of life, and appreciation for the power of generosity. We live these values in abundance, joyfully sharing our gifts and strengths. No, I'm not there yet. I haven't forgotten. Just let me finish my script here. I have to do what they say I have to do, and you're on my script. I have not forgotten you. Today is Share the Plate Sunday. This means that all the money we gather will be given to a partner or program in the community that embodies our values well. This week we are gathering funds to support a program that feeds children who are at risk of hunger. The Packing Friendship Program. Lori Riegert is the lead for our work on this program. I now welcome her to speak about why we should be generous in supporting Packing Friendship. Share the plate, Lori Riegert.
I ordered the offering without me talking. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name's Lori Riegert, and I volunteer with the Packing Friendship program that was started many years ago, and recently I took it on from Teresa Gelb, who had been doing it for many, many, many years. I have several people that help me on this program that have been doing it way longer than me. Penny Tabiska, Dawn McKenzie, Kathy Johnson, Emily Soroki are all the people who drive the food. And then Suzanne Sorum and Carol Velasquez are some new members that have joined us this year. This is a child nutrition project, like she said. It was started, just a little bit of background, Barb Tilley from the Grace Lutheran Church started this many years ago. She noticed that school children in poverty were not receiving food on weekends and holidays, and so they were at risk for hunger. You know, they were getting school lunch and school breakfast and things like that, but then they went home on the weekends and for holidays, and they didn't have the food that they needed. And so she saw a program in Seattle, and she started it here with 16 churches, including ours. And the way it works is that the schools are paired up with churches, and the schools find the children that need extra support with food, and they divide, so there's like groups of 10 children. And then the churches prepare bags of food, which we deliver normally on Friday, depending on the school schedule. The funding that we get from this program is $800 twice a year from the Community Action. And according to what I've figured out, that is about half of what we need to pay for this program. Today we also have generous donations from church members too that have helped with this. Today there's 23 churches, also 2 Rotaries, and a mother's group. And all of the elementary schools in East Wenatchee and Wenatchee are part of this, as well as all of the middle schools, and then also West Side High School. So the way it works is that twice a month I shop. Suzanne and I go shopping. We pack the bags and leave them in bins in the back for the drivers to pick up. When we go shopping, we try and find shelf-stable, palatable, nutritious foods. You know, I look at a lot of labels and try and limit the sugar and the salt and try and make sure that there's lots of protein in the foods that we choose. So one of the things that I just want to leave you with is, you know, I've been a dietitian for 30 years in child nutrition, and children learn, they learn when they're young what foods they like and what foods they don't like, and they learn about nutrition as children. That's why I chose to be in the field of nutrition for 30 years, because you can make a lot of impact on children if you start young learning about nutrition. So I could provide cheap food to these people, and we could just give them the cheapest food that there is, and that's what they would end up liking. Or we could have a little bit more money and we could provide some high quality nutritious food, and children would learn to like that kind of food. And so just hope that you'll think of that and that you'll give generously to this program so that I can provide the best food that I can for them.
Thank you, Lori. As we pass the baskets, you may give checks, and if you do so, make them out to Cascade UU Fellowship. All checks will go to Share the Plate. If you want to give for any other reason, such as filling your pledge to our general expenses, make that clear in the notation line. Remember, this is your chance to enable children to have what Lori called high-quality nutrition. It's time for the collection.
As we prepare to close our worship, let us remember that we go into this world with all these friends willing to help, to lean on us and for us to lean on. Let us always uphold the beauty and the joy and the power of this community wherever we may go in the days to come.
All right. We ready to say our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and embody in our lives until we are together again. Okay, before we enjoy our coffee hour, as you are willing and able, please form a circle to sing our closing song, Carry the Flame.